Can you hear me? Okay, great, great. I am telling you, I mean it seriously. I am just going to smash things. Just going to smash them. Last week it was the camera. This week it's the sound. Nothing changed. You understand? We haven't changed anything. Haven't switched any settings. Nothing. Everything's been exactly the same, and it just decides not to work. It's the only software we have that just decides not to work. I don't know what to do about it. I'll tell you, it is enough to make me just absolutely barking, raving mad. Barking mad. What do I say? I don't know what to say. I don't know what to say. The system that I was using all day today for NRA and for a couple of other shows just decided not to work on Ustream. And it's really, 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 really frustrating. Good God in heaven. All right, here we are. Anyway, good to see everybody. Sure know how to get off to a great start here in Happy Land. I was actually in a pretty good mood until I popped on the first pass of this, and then nothing came out of the speakers and stuff. So anyway, here we are. We have yet another theme show. We've been talking about doing theme shows, and now we've got one. We've had a couple in a row now, and this one was sent in by email from Janik Litalian, one of those two. Janik sent us an email saying he's just sick and tired of hearing from his left-wing friends about white privilege and so on, and he doesn't really know exactly how to fire back at them. So we decided to make tonight the great How to Fight Social Justice Warriors Swiss Army knife, kind of the utility episode for all of us there. And I haven't had a chance to look at these questions yet either, because I've been working editing the new show, the After Hours, which is really fun. Working on this second of the middle of the second 3 TPUSA videos. And everything else that has to get done around here. So, in any event, before we go any further, I noticed from our running commentary stream that you get to see if you watch the show live, that our friend Viper Check, who, as if you're not a regular of the show right now, or by now I suppose I should say, you don't know that Foghorn is an actual fighter pilot, and he took me down to I got myself there, but had the best day of my life out there out at MacDill Air Force Base and CENTCOM, and I can't tell you how much fun I had. And it turns out that Colonel Foghorn Malone, as of April 1st, is Colonel Foghorn Malone retired. And I don't know what to say about that other than to tell you that that naming ceremony at the with the rest of the F-16 drivers and other Air Force, even some twin engine pukes down there, as I understand it. It was the most amazing experience of my life. It was absolutely incredible. I can't tell you how much it means to me, Foghorn. And I can't, so I probably won't even try. But for the small, I wish this was a much, much bigger audience, but on behalf of everybody here in the Stratosphere Lounge, everybody in BillWhittle.com, and everybody in the United States of America, thank you not only for being such a good friend to me, but thank you for many, many years of service to this country in exemplary fashion. And the job of... We do not understand. I have a dim. Hang on, I'm about to do something else that's going to make me want to smash things. There we go. I have a dim understanding of the kind of things that he does. I've flown with some of his wingmen and some of his partners and some of his fellow officers. I got a chance to visit CENTCOM. It took probably 15, 20 minutes for them to get all the sensitive stuff off the screen, because God knows you don't want to have me blurt out something because the picture doesn't work out or something. I just start yapping about all kinds of things. But in any event, I got to sit there at CENTCOM. I got to watch these people work, and I don't know. I I have a rough idea of how much I don't know. That's what I wanted to say. I've got a generally rough idea of how much I don't know about what Foghorn does, our Viper check here. But I can tell you this: there are many Americans that are alive because of him that wouldn't be otherwise. He's he's engaged some very bad dudes and had a chance to see it on TV, and to have that kind of moral courage and that kind of physical courage as well, coupled with the kind of fundamental decency that makes this country what it is. I just honestly could not be prouder to be a friend there, pal. And I've been threatening to get down there to Tampa in the Long Easy, and I'm going to do it. I just right now it's not flying because the mags are giving me some trouble. Magnetos are. For those of you who may be new, we have dual ignition systems on virtually every airplane that I can think of. I've never seen one that didn't. Dual independent ignition systems. So if you lose one of them, you're still flying on the other, and one of them is an electronic system. It's very advanced and provides a really hot spark and perfect timing and adjusts itself. Fantastic. And the other ignition system is technology that I think probably comes from the 30s. It might even come from the 20s, but it's certainly about that old. It's called a magneto, and basically what it does is it's essentially an electromagnet. And as long as the engine is turning, as long as the engine is burning gasoline and the prop is turning, it's driving these magnetos, and the magnetos make their own spark. So as long as you got fuel in the airplane and the engine's running, you'll keep on flying. If you lost your battery and you didn't have something like that, and your electrical system went down, then you would start gliding. So anyway, it's not fully operational. It's tricky too, I have to tell you. So I always have to put some kind of little thing in here to wander off the beaten trail. The problem with this magneto check was, and this is a little alarming to me, is it might have been bad for quite a long time, because what you do in an airplane, and I won't spend too much time on this, kids, I really won't. You go out to the end of the runway, you run up the power to about 60-70% power, somewhere in there, half power somewhere, and you turn off one system and it dips a little bit, and you turn off the other and it dips a little bit, but as long as it runs on both of them, your mags are good. Hooray! Well, I did that check and everything was working. And then on the mags only, with the electronic ignition system turned off, just on the mags, I started putting some power in there as if I was going to, really fly. And the more power I put into the magnetos, the worse they got, to the point where this thing just simply wouldn't run. So once I discovered that, I decided it's time to sit down and, keep the plane grounded, because my absolute 100% rule of thumb, and it's a good rule of thumb in aviation or any other aviation or any other business at all that's critical. And my rule of thumb is I will not take off in an aircraft where I have a known defect. Just won't do it, because I figure that's a tough one to explain to St. Peter. Good night. Thank you so much, Linda. Our incredible accountant who's been doing such amazing work untangling this beehive of artistic 20 years of writing and chauffeuring that level of accountancy. In any event, April 1st is a kind of a cruel joke to play on us, Foghorn. When I got the email, I thought, maybe he's just being funny, but he wasn't. And I was going to ask you about the Syrian strike, because I bet it was fun to watch. In any event, congratulations, my friend. I just am so proud to know you, and I could not be happier for you in your retirement. I'm going to fly my little mini fighter down there, and we will fly around over the bay, and we'll have ourselves some fun, and I'll shoot all of you miserable, wretched bastards down just to show you that I can. Nothing personal. And as long as, as long as World War III is fought between American Long Easies and either Russian or Chinese, Cessna 172s, I think we got a good chance to win that one. So anyway, congratulations, pal. Seriously, in all seriousness, congratulations. It's really, really remarkable, and thanks for everything you did, not just for me, but for the country. Okay, so back to our problem here. Yeah, we had an email from our friend Janik. I want to say, was it Janik? Yes, Janik. And basically, Janik's question was, how do I deal with white privilege? And he sent like a snippet of comments from Facebook, looks like. So I'll just read a little bit of them for you so we can have a good jumping off point, because this is the kind of thing that really is got to come to an end. Here it comes, downloading. Let's have a look, zoom in. Okay, so what Janik sent me was a little strip of comments from Facebook. And there's a picture of these. There's two white men in. You know what? Can I just? No, I can't. There's two white men in it looks like an airport, just sitting there in an airport, and the post is not from Janik. The post he's reacting to is from somebody named Mulan Katie. Shared France 24's English post, and basically here's what the post says. Just 500 meters from my home in Hong Kong, I see a young white guy begging for travel funds with 3 kids no older than 5. Were those even his kids? Ironically, in one of the poorest districts in Hong Kong. Had he not been white, he would have been questioned for child neglect. Ultimate white privilege. So let's talk a little bit about white privilege. If I understand this person's comment, what she's saying is, two foreigners, two white people are sitting there with a bunch of kids and they're begging for money, and that's their white privilege is that they weren't arrested. So what that seems to indicate to me was that if they were not white, if they were the people that live in Hong Kong as a general rule, if they were Asian people, then they would have been arrested. So this entire white privilege thing here is based on the idea that this white guy or two white guys can sit there with 3 kids no older than 5 and not get arrested for begging for money, while presumably, if those people had been Asian, they would have been arrested. Now, I don't know, just call me naive, but my understanding throughout pretty much all of human history, and I haven't seen it change yet, is that if you had to decide which people are hold life, individual life, to a higher standard than others, it may not be everybody in Hong Kong. I know Hong Kong is a very civilized place, but it's not the United States that treats people like cogs. It's the Chinese people that do that. It's the Chinese people that do things like abandon baby girls and selectively abort baby girls so they can have little boys. So let's just start from the beginning here and understand that this entire idea that Asian people would have been arrested because of this horrible kids sitting on the floor here, apparently. Just that in itself is absurd and ridiculous. And that's just the lead-in. I want to talk about white privilege. I really do. I really, really do. Let me see if there's anything else there. Okay, so here's what it is. Now, I know you guys are going to think you're going to think I'm going to say there's no such thing as white privilege, but there is actually such a thing as white privilege. And let me explain to you what white privilege is. White privilege is the gift of not having somebody else to blame. That's white privilege. Maybe we can get that on a t-shirt. White privilege is the gift of not having someone else to blame. Whenever you hear people talk about, in the United States especially, if you hear people talk about being kept down, that there's external forces at work trying to keep them down, you know you're dealing with somebody who's either very lazy, very stupid, or both. Any time that you can write an excuse for your failures is, we know what this is. Not only is this white privilege, but there's an antithetical aspect to it, which is spreading like cancer because of these social justice warriors. But if the white privilege is that you do not get to blame other people for your mistakes, that there's no one keeping you down, because there isn't, then the converse is true also. To the degree that the black community talks about being kept down by white racists here in America, then you would call that the black disadvantage. Now, neither of these things exist. Neither of them exist. And for those of you that say it does, oh, what do you mean you don't know, you don't believe racism exists? That's because you're a white male. Let me ask you a quick question here, Snowflake. If you had to apply for any university in the country and you were a white Christian male, 18 years old, trying to get into Harvard, and opposite you, another final two slots, one slot available left for Harvard. You're a white Christian male from Alabama, and up against you is a Palestinian lesbian, and we can add all the other suffixes that we want to. Who do you think would selectively be admitted to Harvard University in 2017? Who do you think? We all know what the answer to that is. And we don't complain about it because we have the white privilege of not having other people to blame for our failures. We don't get to sit around and stay in college forever and ever and ever and do nothing in the world, not have a single skill, not have a single ability, not be able to build anything, can't even do your own laundry. Can't even do your own laundry. You can't manage a bank account. You can't drive. You have no driver's license. You can't do anything, you social justice warriors. The first warrior is a faint dead away at the sight of a paring knife sitting on the counter. But you can't do anything. And I know you can't do anything, and you know you can't do anything. It bothers you in an obscure way that you can't do anything, because the only thing that you can do is complain and look for racism. So here's how it works, social justice warriors. You're incompetent, you're lazy, you're stupid, you're pampered, you're spoiled, you've never been told no, you know nothing about the world, nothing about the world. All you know how to do is protest because that's all you've been taught. I will go and say that it's not your fault, but, there's the weapon, you picked it up. So, since you can't do anything, and since other people can do things, you have to think of some good reason for why people can't do things, and also to justify your basically useless existence. So this all works out very well for you. Your job now, entire generation of social justice warriors, your job in life is not to be a medical technician or an engineer or a bus driver or a janitor or anything else useful. Your job in life is to look for racism, and if it doesn't exist, you will invent it. So, you have created a belief in people that they are being held down by the white power structure. But if there's a member of the white power structure in the United States of America, I'm on it. And either I didn't get the memo or the checks or anything, because I have no memory ever of being in collusion with anybody to foster racism. No, I don't. Maybe I was just so busy snorting cocaine off of Ukrainian hookers that I just forgot about my weekly meetings of the Let's Keep Down Black People white privilege meeting, which they have just at the side of every single one of the American Legion posts. We run them out on Wednesday nights, right after the Stratosphere Lounge thing goes. So if you cannot prove institutional racism, and you can't because there isn't any, because it's against the law. It's against the law. What you're doing is you are attaching something beyond your ability, which is a privilege that you don't have. You're creating this magical, mystical thing that doesn't exist. Because there is in fact a difference between us and you. There is in fact a difference, and the difference is we are responsible for our own lives, and you're not. So SJWs, pretty simple, really. You have to call us racists who benefit unfairly from a system because you simply can't do anything. You're not good at anything. And somebody else is good at things, so there's got to be a reason for it. It can't just be that you're lazy or stupid, even though you're lazy and stupid. So you invent something and you go looking for it. But by any practical measure in terms of hiring, in terms of compensation, in terms of, look at the admission records of every single university in this country, look at it for the last 20 years and ask yourself, who's being discriminated against here? Ask yourself, what is the one single group of people that the entire American society is allowed to criticize mercilessly at any time, anywhere? Who's the only people that don't have an escape? It's white males, basically. And I'm perfectly happy with that, because the more complaining you do, and the more crying about this thing that doesn't exist you do, the easier it gets for the rest of us and our kids. So march on. You're going to be in for a bit of a surprise about a lot of things, though. And one of the things you're going to be a bit surprised about as time goes on is you're going to be surprised that the word warrior has a meaning beyond the rhetorical meaning. You're going to be surprised that that's an actual occupation. And not only is it an actual occupation, you'll be surprised in life as life goes on for you. You'll be surprised that not only is it an occupation, warrior is a hobby for a lot of people. And it's not just a name that you put on a t-shirt or a sign. It's an actual occupation, and it's a state of mind. And you don't have it. None of you have it. None of you. You Antifa cowards, none of you. You don't have any courage. You don't have any physical courage. You don't have any moral courage. You know perfectly well that by smashing windows in cars in the United States of America, the worst thing that could happen to you is you get arrested and you spend 3 or 4 hours in jail. You're not brave. You don't have any courage. That's not courage. That's just hooliganism. That's just a kid on the floor at Walmart stamping and screaming because he didn't get his toy. So don't be looking for respect, and don't be looking for this thing. You can look. I know I can't change your mind. You miserable, low-life weasels. You lazy, stupid people. I got to think of SJWs. Just 1 second here. I've almost got it. Anyway, I'll think of some great other words for the initials SJW. But you're certainly not moral privilege. So if you can show me a case where a white person has selectively been treated better than a black person, I'm looking forward to hearing it. If you can show me an instance, any instance where in the pop culture where black people are made fun of and white people aren't, if you want to try that, you go ahead. If you want to show me a case where there's people openly speaking about racism, you go ahead. You are pretending that there's a locked door in front of you. And the reason you're pretending there's a locked door in front of you is because you're too stupid and too lazy to get up and start walking. So you gotta come up with something. And by the way, that's not just you and by the way, you social justice warriors, every single one of you are privileged Pampers, little crybabies. Every single one. You don't even know what the term social justice warrior is unless you're going to a college that costs $70,000 a year. So you don't get to be you're not street people, okay? You're not out there on the streets. You just want to feel like you're out there on the streets. You want to steal. You want to talk about appropriation? You want to steal the legitimacy of street people, and you want to try and steal the legitimacy of the civil rights movement, which was 50, 60 years ago. And no, you don't get it. Sorry. The reason you're called social justice warriors is because we are out of injustice. The United States ran out of injustice back in the mid to late 70s, and by early 1980s, injustice supplies were gone in America. We had passed peak injustice probably around 1968, and since then you've been manufacturing your own synthetic injustice to justify your existence because you can't do anything. You're not good at anything. You're not even okay at anything. You don't know how to do the laundry. You can't drive a car. You don't know how to tell time. You're the most ridiculous, absolutely pathetic group of people I've ever seen. And all of this is simply puffing yourself up to give you a sense of entitlement because this is the only place that you're allowed to compete. You're not allowed to compete in sports. You're not allowed to compete in nationality. You're not allowed to compete in anything. You're not allowed to say anything's better than anything else. But the only thing you can compete on is who's the biggest victim. And let me just give you one last little memo here, SJWs, because I think this might do you some good. God knows you're not going to listen to it because the one thing you've proven to everybody in this country and the world is that you are incapable of learning anything. You are so wrapped up in your own moral vanity that you can't see anything. So let me just say this. Be careful about starting fights with people that take the word warrior seriously. I would do that, number one. And number two, you do not get the opportunity to tell other people how they're going to live. You can whine and complain all you want to, but it has just as much effect as all of the protests you launched against Donald Trump being president. And that is zero. And I'm at the point, slack-jawed wussies, very good, Ken Finney, very good. You young ladies out there, ladies, you can scream and shriek and talk about this is oppressing me and I'm not safe here and start crying and all the rest. And you can even start swatting people, which we allow. We allow it. In fact, I'm in the mood to make a social justice warrior's head explodes. Let me just say a word to the social justice warriors out there, because I know there's millions watching the show. This is something I brought up before. And listen, I don't bring these things up with actual ladies and because I don't need to. I don't need to. I just bring it up when it needs to be brought up to confront people like you with your own moral infarctions or whatever the word is. Here's something for you, little pink-haired feminists and the men that love them. Men. I know you think that feminism is a battle, and I know that you feel like going up there and saying, we equal rights and we got to stop Trump and all the rest. I know it makes you feel important, but you're not important because there's no risk. You're protesting, but you're protesting against nothing. So you don't get any respect. But here's something for you, young feminist. I generally, as I say, I don't have to go around saying this, and my attitude towards this is similar to my attitude towards transgendered people, which is if somebody wants me to call them miss or ma'am, I'm perfectly happy to do that. It's no skin off of my nose. I don't care. I get along with people. I'm a nice guy. And I am happy to be a member of a functioning society where everybody is allowed to play. And if you want me to call you Caitlin, I'm happy to do it. I really am. Now, if you are going to make me say that not only is my name Caitlin, but I am in fact a woman, that's where we break company. That's where we go down different paths. Because if I agree to that, then I'm agreeing to things that I know to be not true, which is your entire philosophy of life. You agree to believe in things you know aren't true. And white privilege is one of them. So, let me see if I can get this straight. Here we go. For all of you young feminists out there, just think about this, please. Feminism exists because men allow it to exist. Should I say that again for you? Feminism exists because decent men allow it to exist. And the answer to that question doesn't really make you very happy, does it? You would say, how dare you say that? I say, well, it's very simple. If we didn't allow it to exist, if we were in fact like the people that you defend over in the Middle East, once you started lipping off, we'd put a fist in your face. And what would you do about it? Nothing, because you're girls and you can't fight like boys. You know this. And the so-called males that are with you who are defending all of your feminist rights know this too. But the fact is, we could just simply stop you by force if we wanted to. And we don't. And you could say, I'd call the police. And you'd be right. And other males would come to take away the males who are not letting you be feminists. But it's all a construct that we allow you to have because we're nice guys. Because if we weren't nice guys, like people in Saudi Arabia, let's say, we wouldn't put up with this. We wouldn't put up with this at all. We'd get you back in the kitchen and put a tent over you, like the people you're so deeply in love with. Then that'd be the end of it. And there's nothing you can do about it because you can't fight. And you could say something like, well, we would get guns. Please. 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 We both know how ridiculous that is. You don't know which end of the gun the bullet comes out of, for God's sake. We allow you to be feminists because we're good men, because we value people's ability to be equal. To the degree that it's equal pay for equal work, I am 100% feminist, but that's not what feminism means anymore. We all know it. So, there you go. Be careful about meeting real warriors as you walk down the road of life, and keep in the back of your little minds the fact that your entire feminist idea of yourself, your entire identity is something that people like me allow you to have. And if a lot of people like me decided that we didn't want you to have it, then you wouldn't have it. Kind of stings, doesn't it? And if you still think I'm a little crazy about that, I hate to rub this in because I genuinely love women and I adore my wife and all the rest of it. But if you think I'm making all this up, just do this. Go and look at Olympic records for the strongest woman and the fastest woman. Go and see. And compare them to the records of any males in any college and in most high schools. And you're going to find that virtually every single high school in America has a boy on it, a boy, 15, 16 years old, who's faster than the fastest woman who ever lived. And stronger, too. The reason SJWs that there's a women Olympics is because if there wasn't a women's Olympics, there wouldn't be any women at the Olympics in sports that require strength or speed. Obviously, things like shooting or sports of skill that don't require physical strength or speed, they certainly can compete. But there wouldn't be any women pole vaulters because if you look at the bottom guy, in the Olympics, who's the worst pole vaulter of the 2016 Olympics? His height is much better than the best woman in the world. So there you go. I know you don't like it, and as I say, I don't like doing this because it doesn't make me happy. That's not what we're supposed to be doing with each other, not just men towards women. We're supposed to be admiring each other and taking care of each other. But if you want to stand up there and make statements like this, saying that these two people sitting on a floor, slackers, by the way, who are basically begging money to travel, are not being arrested because they're white. No. So there is your answer for you, Janet, and I hope that does you some good. All right, let's see here. All right, so here are the questions which I haven't reviewed yet. I'm going to try and take them in order of the comment section. I seem to be old enough to remember when the comment section at YouTube actually meant something, and now I can't make any sense of it. You can't rank them by order that they came in. You can't rank them by number of thumbs up. Facebook ranks them in some order that doesn't make any sense to me. But it turns out that the next one is from our friend Steve Darrow. And basically, let's say, I haven't seen any of these before. So Steve Darrow says, at some point along the continuum from know-nothing college SJW at one end to Hillary, Bernie, and Barry on the other, there has to be a point of realization that progressivism is a scam. I watched Enemy at the Gates recently, and the role of the political officer struck me. I thought about seemingly intelligent friends who are strongly progressive, and it makes me wonder if they would welcome a tyrannical government because they wish to be der Kommissar in the new order. What percentage of progressives do you think are in on the scam versus just being useful idiots? That's actually not just a good question, that's the question. I think that there is not that kind of distinction, Steve. I think that the even the most useful idiots understand that there's something not true about this, and I think that even Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders believe it to some degree. I don't think it's a point where you just suddenly realize, oh my God, this whole thing is just a lie, and it's a con game. So there you go. They all know it. And so your question, I think, well, the question I want to answer anyway, this is my show, is that what is their motivation for being so sympathetic, not only sympathetic to tyrannical regimes, being, in fact, the authors and the movers of tyrannical regimes? I know I say this all the time, just needs to be said all the time. The communists were international socialists. The Nazis were racial socialists. The communist Chinese were class socialists. Like the Soviets, 150 million people killed. So there is something about the collectivist mindset, and the one thing I would be willing to say is, I do not know where the wedge is. I suspect we're born with it, but something is splitting people into two different groups, and the two different groups are, we're playing bingo. One is R and the other's K, but let's just think of it in a little more easily accessible form here. People are born to be sympathetic to collectives, or people are born to be sympathetic to individuals, and that's what determines all the rest of it. If you are a collectivist, you believe that the survival of the group and the improvement of the society and all the rest of it is the goal of all of us together. It's the culmination of, I was going to say a life's work, but an individual life's work is not really that important to them. You believe that your purpose is to serve society. And I don't believe that nonsense at all. I think society exists as a group of individuals. So If you're a collectivist, you have in fact got a fairly low tolerance for human individuality, which means you've got a fairly high tolerance of murdering individuals, right? If you're a collectivist, you don't believe in the sanctity of individuals, if all you see are groups, then you are stuck because you think that the world can be made perfect by making society perfect. I think that the world is not perfect because of biological conflicts in the human animal that we share with virtually all other animals on this earth, and that as civilized people with a cerebral cortex, we are in a period of our evolution, which we've been in this period for many, probably 100,000 years, but certainly for 8 or 9,000 years. Human beings are now caught in a world between the biological instincts that got us to where we are, and then having the cerebral cortex, the intelligence, the reason, the restraint, the discipline to rein those things in. And unfortunately, we can't rein them all in all the time, and some people don't rein them all in at all. Sometimes nobody reins anything in. Some people are just wild, self-centered murderers, rapists, thieves, and all the rest of it. Thieves. Thieves. It's hard for this audience to understand, I know. When we think about thieves, we think, well, I don't know if I'd have the guts to rob a bank, or I certainly don't think I'd ever go into somebody's window. But really, if you get right down to it, there's not a person who's watching this show, who's a regular anyway, who could take somebody else's stuff knowingly. You just couldn't do it. It's wrong. And it's wrong because you're an individualist, you see? If you're a collectivist and if you're a collectivist and all you see are groups, then if you have a poor person breaks into a rich person's house, he's basically committing what you consider to be social justice, when in point of fact, he's committing simple burglary. You are taking stuff from an individual that an individual worked for. He or she was not assigned their house and their car based on race. We both know this is true. We can agree, certainly I can agree, that there was a time in our history where races were excluded or legally persecuted or denied access. No question about that. I'm just saying that hasn't been the case for 50, 60 years now, and it might be time for you progressives to progress a little bit. That's really it. If you don't see people as individuals, then stealing from an individual doesn't bother you. You're just taking for your group what the other group has. And then you get to the real crux of the matter here, Steve, because in order to be a progressive, you have to have one ingredient, one. All of progressive. If you understand this, then politics in America, politics throughout world history, it all gets very simple if you can understand just this one thing. Well, that's uncanny. I just turned to the door and I thought, I wonder where she is. And then I heard the door open, and there she is. You cannot have socialism without envy. You can't have it without envy. And even in the places, there she goes, even in places like Sweden, you are still basically envious. And what you're envious of in Sweden is not your neighbor's house or car. In Sweden, which I will admit is a pretty advanced form of socialism, in Sweden, you are envious of everybody else's moral stature. So you will sacrifice your own rewards, because if you didn't, you'd be an outcast. So if you believe in the collective, then you are likely to have enemies. And since you believe that society is perfectible, when you find out it's not, then it can't be because of this stuff, right? It can't be because of this stuff, because if it's true that we have biological flaws, that we're greedy or rapacious, or sometimes we're ungrateful, or all the rest of it, if you believe that to be true, which I believe, and which individualists believe to be true, if you believe that it's built into the human condition, then you can't be a progressive anymore. So if there's a problem in society like poverty, let's say, or injustice, then it has to be the fault of society. And if you can re-engineer your society, you think, then you can engineer a society that raises perfect people. And my point is, you're not the first people to give it a try. SJWs, you might want to do a little reading. There were 150 million people killed in the last century trying out this idea of yours, which is pretty spectacular failure. And it's not just an economic failure. It's a moral failure. It leads to at the best case scenario, Sweden, it leads to an absolutely uncanny abandonment of just the fundamental life force. Watch Swedes commit suicide right now, and culturally, and you realize they don't have any fight left in them. Of course, they don't have any fight left in them. What would they have to fight for? Everything's given to them. Sweden is the world's largest nursing home. Cradle to grave benefits. Oh, wow. And it's all free. No. Your cradle to grave benefits are paid for by your endless working for somebody else. You work endlessly for somebody else. And so if you are a collectivist, you have to be. I can just sum this up very quickly and I'll get going. If there are individuals in the world and you take their money, then it's stealing. If there are classes or groups of people and one group or class takes something that belongs to another group or class, it's justice. So that's what it has to be. Of course they want to push people around. This is how stupid and lazy people get nice things. I'll tell you, you don't have to go any further than this. I was looking for a good example, but you just don't, it just happened 8 months ago, something like 5 months ago, I don't even remember. Here it is. Fidel Castro, who you progressives adore. And let's just go over the reasons you adore him. You have a corrupt regime in Cuba. That's true. But America's not Cuba. America's not got that kind of corruption. The only place you find that kind of corruption in America is in democratically controlled cities. You don't find Batista-level corruption among the American people. You only find it among Democrats in cities. And corruption is bad, and I agree. And so you've got these people who are very poor. And they're very poor because their social system limits them, caste and all the rest of it. So along comes this bearded guy, and his name is Fidel, which means truth. Wow, how about that? And he and another guy named Che, who wrote his diaries on motorcycles, and they're romantic and handsome, and they're rough around the edges. They're everything that American boys aren't. They're dangerous, and they're not playing by anybody's rules, and all the rest of this stuff. So Fidel, out in the jungle, a simple man of the people, who apparently during his entire life had one shirt his entire life. Fidel, man of the people who wears one shirt his entire life and dresses like a common person because he is, overthrows the corrupt Batista regime and turns the entire wealth of the country over to the people of Cuba and divides everything equally. And even though they're very poor, at least they're all equal. No one's better than anyone else, and no one's richer than anyone else. And that's why you love Cuba. And when Fidel Castro died, he had $900 million in his personal bank account. $900 million is how much money Fidel Castro had left. Not how much he totally spent during the course of his life, because that was billions of dollars. But when he died, Castro still had $900 million of reserve money that he hadn't spent yet, which he stole from the Cuban people. That's an awfully inconvenient truth, don't you think? Don't you think that's a little inconvenient that Fidel Castro has had $900 million? Where did he get it from? Fidel Castro didn't invent the iPhone. Fidel Castro didn't work in the fields, didn't do anything. Fidel Castro stole it from the people who were stupid enough to believe that if he wore the same green shirt every day of his life, then people would believe that he's poor just like them. $900 million. Now, ask yourself how a rather scrangly, tall, and very smart, no question about it. Ask yourself how a young Cuban lad, I don't know how old he was during the revolution, I want to say early 20s, let's say, maybe a little bit later. If you're young Fidel Castro, working out in the back of Cuba, you're either I don't know what his background is. I wouldn't be surprised at all if he was a rich student. But in any event, there you are, you're young Fidel Castro. And so if you're going to end up with $900 million, Fidel, how are you going to do it? Well, you're not going to start an auto plant. You're not going to start a casino. You're not going to do any of those things. You're on the outside. So you launch a revolution. I have no doubt at all that you believed in it when you did it. I have no doubt that you believed in it. But then over time, you began to realize that power is really nice, that you like living in Batista's place, and that you like the cars, and you like the submission, and you like all the respect, and you like standing in front of groups of people, and speaking for 4 hours. as if people cared. And you become a champion of the working man. And you sit on your moral perch, you fight the great Satan, America, which has the audacity to let its own people determine their own destinies and succeed and become relatively wealthy, because your people are starving. And you do all these things, you get all the stuff you want out of life, and then you die with $900 million. Folks, you might want to notice this. Mao didn't go back to his classroom. Stalin didn't go back to being a seminary student. Stalin had one job in his entire life, which was he worked at a meteorological station for a couple of months or something, wrote down temperatures. That's the only job he ever had. Stalin didn't go back. Lenin didn't go back. Trotsky didn't go back. None of these people went back to the poverty that they came from and that they claimed was the reason they were launching their socialist revolutions. None of them went back. Because if they had gone back, they'd still be wrong, but at least they wouldn't be hypocrites. If they had gone back, then they would say, okay, they're hypocrites. They're not hypocrites, rather, but they're still idiots. So that's it, Steve. If you are too stupid and too lazy to go out and make a good life for yourself, if you have no morality, and if you see people as just a group of impersonal classes out there, you can make a pretty decent living by being part of the team that's taking from one group of people and giving it to you. And that's the best case scenario. Best case scenario. I talked to Natasha, and she simply can't believe the tax situations in America. She's literally dumbfounded by it. She stops her cold. I don't know what they pay in Russia. I want to say it's 16, 17% or something. Oh my God, we got a whole class of hardworking elves back there. Thank you, Bill.
See you, Bill.
Alrighty. There she goes. My God, here we are. Craziness. It's a menagerie. I'll just do the show in a closet next time. So you've got bye-bye. I know I was talking about something valuable. Oh, yeah. Natasha was saying, wait a minute, I want to make sure I get this straight, because tax time is coming up and I have a large check to write to people I don't know who take my money without providing any services that I can see. And she says, wait a minute, so you've been talking about income tax this whole time? Yes, we've been talking about income tax, trying to plan things out. But when we go to the grocery store and you look at the receipt, there's a tax on that too. I said, yeah, that's a sales tax. She said, so they tax the money coming in and then they tax the money going out. They do both? I said, yeah, that's America, land of the free. When you get that simple, when you really look at things with fresh eyes, you realize, no, it's theft, Steve. You know this. So there are people out there, the people who want to become progressives, use the moral fig leaf of helping the poor so that they can help themselves. And I've been saying it quite a bit lately, but James, I want to say Maybury, who wrote the Uncle Eric books, said, everything makes sense if you just understand this. They do not collect taxes to provide benefits. They provide some benefits in order for them to be able to collect the taxes. If you understand that, then everything makes sense. I just finished corporations for TPUSA. We'll release those all in short order. The next one is government, and I wrote all three and shot all three at the same time. And the sixth one, number 6, the third of the second series of 3, is taxes. And I was trying to get an idea and try to explain to people how much money we spend in this country. And this goes to your question, Steve, because this is not just a river of money. Let me just give you a couple of examples here. We spend about $3.5 trillion a year, $3,500 billion a year. How much money is that? Now think about this, because it's true. If you spent $1 million every single day since the birth of Christ, you would still not be at $1 trillion. We spend 3.5 of those every year. If you spend not $1 a day, not $10, not $100, if you spent $1 million every day since Christ was born to today, you still would not have $1 trillion. And we spend 3.5 of those every single year. So where does it go? Well, it goes from people like you and me to people like our Facebook poster there, who wail about injustice. It goes to social justice warriors. It goes to all kinds of people. It goes to people who are driven by envy. And this is where the white privilege thing comes in. Because I was not told that anyone else is responsible for my failures, and I was also told that no one else is responsible for my livelihood. I was I was never given the idea that people owed me anything, so I didn't sit around waiting for the Great White Father to come down and give me a car. I figured if I wanted a nice car, I had to go make my own money so I could get my own car. And that's how I grew up, and that's what, if you want to talk about white privilege, that's it. I didn't have anybody to blame, and I didn't have anything to wait for. Nobody owed me anything. But my success, to the degree that it is success, you want to take a look at the finances here when the taxes are written, but to the degree that I've had some success, did not take away anybody else's success. My success and, my little private airplane in this office is not taking money away from people who are in tenements, who could be in college studying to be pharmacists or brain surgeons if only I hadn't stolen their money so I could have my toy. It doesn't work that way. The work that I got paid for is work that I did. It's more work than I did before. I put in 16 hours a day, most days, 5 or 6 days a week. And it's my decision to do so. So the reason that people become progressives, Steve, is because every single year, at very least, $2,000 billion, that is $2 million a day, every day since the birth of Christ, every single year, gets taken from some people and given to other people. And you are going to have to make a choice. Which one are you going to be? If you're an individualist, you figure, okay, my life is my life. I can do as much or as little with it as I want to. Nobody owes me anything. I don't deserve anything from other people. Assistance is nice. It's nice to get a hand when if I stumble or fall or something, but then I'm expected to get back up and I'll help somebody else if they fall. But I'm not going to carry them around for the rest of my life. So you're an individualist. You figure, what do you want? What do you like? What do you want? What do you want and what do you like? This is the essence of freedom, you see. We talk about freedom like we see parchment and we see people standing on hills and maybe we think about, soldiers dying for it. But basically, when you get right down to it, it's what do you want to do? And is anybody stopping you from doing it? And here in America, the answer is pretty much no. You could say, well, I'm being stopped by the fact that I'm a wage slave to the capitalist system. Really? Yes, I want to have a very nice house, but since I work for a corporation, I'll never have enough money to afford a nice house like the rich people. My reply to that would be, then stop working for a corporation. Make your own corporation. If you want big wealth, you have to go and find it. You have to go and make it. You have to create it out of thin air. 94%, 96%, 96%, I think. 96% of all businesses in the United States are gone before 10 years are up. 4% of all business startups last 10 years or longer. 4%. And as I say in this video I'm working on now, as a little sneak peek for you, if 19 times out of 20 you decide that you don't want to be a wage slave and you bet the farm and maybe you mortgage your house or whatever you need to do to start your business, 19 times out of 20 times that doesn't work. And you don't have anything anymore. You didn't even have what you started with. And guess what? Your employees got paid and the government got paid. You got nothing. You got not only did you not get anything, you probably have debt that you're going to have to carry for the rest of your life. And this is what it takes to have a nice house. I mean, a really big house. Anybody in America who works hard can have a nice house. Anybody in this country who works hard can have a very nice house, especially if they do. When I say a very nice house, I don't mean a big house. I don't mean an expensive house. I mean a very nice house. And especially if you do things like, you don't get married until, you don't have kids until you're married. You don't get out of school until you have at least a high school diploma. There's no poverty for people in that group. So in any event, there you go. It's a long time coming there, Steve, but it's a whole bunch of things together. And I just don't like these people very much because they're not very nice people. And they're liars and hypocrites. $900 million. Okay, so the second ranked question is from a guy named Steve Darrow. I think the Temans have basically mutated into some super organism, some kind of colony organism that we're going to call Steve Darrow. So this is the second one. The first one got 10 ups, and this one got 9 thumbs up. Steve Darrow says, social justice warriors don't understand human capital. Again, I hadn't read any of these before the show. I watched a TV show about the USSR making literal copies of the B-29 just after World War II and the indictment of Soviet imagination that act exposed. In contrast, it strikes me as remarkable how quickly Western Europeans recovered from the devastation of World War II. Both of these are examples of the importance of human capital. Building valuable human capital is a significant foundation of our beliefs. How could you explain this concept that is more easily understood? How would you explain this concept so that it's more easily understood by the left? It's an excellent point, as usual. What does he mean by human capital? What does that mean? Well, there are two different ways to look at human capital. You can look at it the American way, the capitalist way, and you can realize that there are, what the hell is that? You can realize that there are probably, let's just say round numbers, 200 million working people out there right now in the United States. And you can look at them as one of two ways. You can use the Soviet system and look at them as 200 million sets of muscles or bureaucrats. You can look at them as 200 million cogs in a gigantic machine, which all we want it to do is turn, because if we can keep the machine turning, then we who run the machine, meaning Stalin and Brezhnev and Khrushchev and Mao and all the rest of them, as long as we can keep the machine moving, then we'll do just fine, like Fidel. So 200 million people is human capital to the degree that it's like any other resource. It's like coal or oil or natural gas or something. We need a quantity of human work into this thing to keep this thing running. That's how you look at human capital if you're a collectivist. If you're an individualist, you look at it as 200 million people out there who are doing all kinds of interesting things, mostly after work. And that, I don't want to say every one of them, but that certainly at any given time, there is enormously huge resources. There's so much work, for example, so much work that could be done with these 200 million people is not getting done now. And we're hardworking people in America. So what do I mean by that? Well, let's say we look at 200 million Americans, and let's say that virtually all of them, it's not true, but let's just say for an example that 200 million Americans work 9 to 5 every day. They work a 40-hour week. That's a lot of work, 200 million people working 40 hours a week. It's a lot of work. Now, that's where we are. If it turns out, however, you were to foster a sense of entrepreneurialism, if we didn't get taxed so hard so that we had some seed capital, so that excess money, more money than I need to live, even more money than I need to be comfortable, I can put that money to work. I can take a risk. I can throw the dice. And this little company called Apple's kind of interesting to me. Toy computer, why not? Let's give it a whirl. If you have those kind of situations, then you don't have anymore 200 million people putting in 8 hours a day. If every single person in America became an entrepreneur, you'd have 200 million people putting in 16 hours a day. You would double the output simply because of the hours that they would put in. That's not including any wealth that they generate because of what they would come up with. I think I almost wrote this into corporations. I'm going to do it in wealth creation. I think there's the greatest example today is Uber. I don't know what their current market value is. I saw an appraisal several months ago that said Uber was worth $63 billion. $63,000 million is what Uber is worth now. I don't doubt that, by the way. Now Uber will run courier packages. Uber will go and get you food. If you live in a city, Uber is terrific. In fact, if you live in a city and you like to go out and have fun, Uber is essential. I stopped worrying about going out to a restaurant and having a good time because I Uber everywhere now. It's $7. That's what the valet parking would cost here in Los Angeles. And I get to drink as much as I want to, which I don't do very often, but when I do, it's nice not to have to get behind a wheel of a large hurtling piece of steel and hope I can get this thing home in one piece. So Uber is a great example for a number of reasons. One of the reasons Uber is a great example is Uber is filling a need that we didn't know existed. Isn't that interesting? Uber and all of the rest of these things like Lyft and the rest, but we'll just say Uber. Uber is filling a need that we didn't know we had before Uber came along. And this same thing, by the way, this thing fulfills a need that we didn't know we had until we had one. And now we realize, can't live without this thing. And so Apple's a great example too, but Uber's a better example, and I'll tell you why. If you think about the value of the iPhone and why Apple's the richest company in the world, deserves to be. If you think about the value of, why does this thing keep, I keep thinking it's turned on. I'm seeing the reflection on this of my monitor. Sorry about that. This thing requires engineering skill. This thing requires, glass and metal and so on. So you're actually making something, and it muddies things up a little bit. But just let's go with Uber for a second. Why is Uber worth $63 billion? Well, it's worth $63 billion because there's enough people who are willing to pay for it, right? Now you get down to the brass tacks. What is Uber? What is it? Apple Computers is a factory. Apple Computers manufactures a product. They take in raw materials, they hire a team of engineers and designers and assemblers and technicians and all the rest, and it creates a product. That's understandable. But what is Uber? What is it? It's an idea. It's just that simple. It's just a very, very good idea. And the genius of Uber is that they're worth 63 billion dollars last time I checked. But the genius of Uber was to say there are people out there who need rides and there are people out there who have spare time and need money. Why don't we put these two things together? I think 10, 15 years ago, I think the whole thing would have been unthinkable. It would have been unthinkable without this because you can't have Uber without this. You cannot have Uber without something like this. And it can't just be a phone either. It's got to have a little map and GPS and all the rest. So, what is Uber? Uber is this. I'll show you what Uber is. Uber is this. That's Uber right there. That's Uber. And I know some people are a little too literally minded out there. Say, well, you're just pointing to an app on the iPhone. No, you don't understand. This is Uber. This is this little square of what is it, quarter inch maybe? This little quarter inch square with a logo on it is worth $63 billion. Why? Because it's something we all want, and we will work harder than we have to get extra money, and we will spend it on things like Uber. It made $63 million of value out of thin air. There was nothing there before. Now there's $63 billion of value because of an idea and nothing other than an idea. 5 or 10 years ago, if Uber had wanted to get started, certainly without question 30 years ago, Uber's problem would have been, how do we we think the taxis are running too late and they're slow and they're overcharged and people they're just nasty. So we think there's a market to basically push taxis as we know them out of business. If they'd had this thought 10, 15 years ago, Uber would have basically said, all right, so if we're going to put the taxis out of business, we need to raise enough money to buy enough cars so that we can have a fleet of cars that we can then deploy cheaper and faster and better service than taxis, and we will essentially outcompete taxis. Now all we have to do is find $60 billion so that we can buy 100,000 cars or whatever the number is, millions, probably millions, certainly of cars across the country. But the genius of Uber is they didn't have to buy any cars. They didn't have to buy any cars, they didn't have to pay anybody out of their own pocket. They didn't have to come up with anything other than the idea. That's why it's worth $63 billion. What's the genius of it is it's just an idea. They have the technology with a smartphone to be able to say there are people out there who needs ride. There are people out there who want to make extra money. All the phone does is put them together. You can say that Uber pays its drivers, but it's not really true. It's not like they're paying them whether they're driving or not. All Uber does is take a charge out of this transaction. Uber takes a percentage out of the money that I pay this guy for driving me someplace. And that's not unreasonable. We wouldn't have met otherwise, I could have just stuck out there with my thumb out, but that didn't work out so well for human history in terms of hitchhiking as a reliable means of getting someplace. So Uber connects me with the driver. That's valuable. Uber also handles the billing. That's valuable. One of the things I like most about Uber, in fact, the thing I probably do like most about Uber is no cash has to be exchanged. I just get in a car and I get out of the car. And then it just bills me on my phone, and I'm happy to pay it. So all of these things are just ideas that didn't have any grounding in, they didn't need capital. The whole thing was out there. It's just absolutely astonishing. It's astonishing. T-Dog Lyle says, if they remade Taxi Driver, do you think Travis Bickle would be an Uber driver? Without question, he'd be an Uber driver. Without question, T-Dog, he'd be an Uber driver. So this is how you can look at human capital in a free society. Now, I don't know who came up with Uber, but let's just say it was two guys. All right? If these two guys had grown up in the Soviet Union and had this idea, then these two guys would have had a $63 billion idea, and then they would have gone back to the coal mines, or they would have gone back to the Department of Redundancy Department, or whatever else they were doing with their lives. If you take people with that kind of creative brilliance where one simple idea comes out to $60 billion, this idea is worth $700, $800 $1,000 million because two guys in a garage had the ability to take a risk and go out there and find some private money and get the ball rolling. So when you talk about human capital, you're really talking about the difference in looking at things, Stephen. If you're a collectivist, human capital is essentially like us a herd of oxen. How much muscle power is there out there? And you could call, service jobs where you hand people, coffee. Just call it muscle power. If you're a collectivist, you say, what is the muscle power of 200 million people working? But if you're an individualist, you say to yourself, how many 60 billion ideas are there out there waiting to be born by people who have got some insight into something that could just absolutely change society for the better, the way Uber has and the way the iPhone has? That's the difference between how we look at human capital and how they look at human capital. And the thing that I hate most about social justice warriors is what was done to them. They've had all of this driven out of them. The only thing they live for is to find inequalities. And that suits people who are lazy and stupid, is to find inequalities. But how many tens of millions of bright ideas were aborted because these kids were told that they can't compete, and that capitalism is evil, and all the rest of this stuff, that they're professors who are in fact the evil swine behind this whole thing. These failed people who go into studies, these failures, these long-haired people who and I was one of them for a while. So, there you go. These arrogant intellectuals who think that because they know Renaissance, you know, Renaissance poets who in Germany, or forget Germany, in Southern Bavarian Renaissance poetry is my expertise, and it pisses me off that I'm trying to get by on $20,000 a year when that idiot over there is selling cars and he's worth $60 million. The arrogance of that. Who cares what you know? If I want to know about Southern Bavarian Renaissance poets, I will hire you to teach me about that. But this guy is providing a useful service to hundreds, thousands, millions of people. It's the arrogance of it. And these losers, these failures, sit in their faculty lounges and talk about how smart they are to each other because they know something very, very deep. It's very deep. It's very narrow. You can spread water a couple ways. You can have it very wide and kind of shallow. You can have it very deep and very narrow. Some people like Thomas Sowell are deep and wide. But these miserable, envious, lazy, stupid people have now had their greedy little paws on our children for 2 generations, and they are turning them into robots. The robots can't think, and they can't work. Robots is not a good term for them because robots are useful. They're turning them into zombies. It's funny. Maybe that's why The Walking Dead is so popular, perhaps, because these young people know they're being turned into The Walking Dead. They don't have any individuality, don't have any drive. I'm generalizing. Of course, I met some terrific millennials. However, there it is. And they have reduced their human capital. The entire human capital of an entire generation has been reduced to the ability to protest things. That's what they're good at. That's what they do. They protest things that people who do things do. Now, as it turns out, probably next week, I think I'm going to release a segment that I did. Members out there watched the Antonia Okafor interviews last week, and they're watching Evan Sayet interviews this week. And Evan Sayet has a routine from his stand-up act called A Deplorable Mind. He's got a routine about the difference between conservatives and liberals and who does what, and it's brilliant. And I'm going to run that publicly next week. And just you'll spend 2.5 minutes, you'll fall down laughing. But as always with Evan Sayet, you're not going to just laugh. You're going to realize, holy cow, this guy's onto something really deep and really important. Okay, so let's see what else have I got. Now, what to my wandering eyes would appear. All right, so let's see. We got 11, 9, 8 is next. Chris Taylor wants to know, in combating social justice warriors, which do you feel is more important, developing rebuttals to individual complaints about Western civilization or ignoring the attempt to bog us down with endless little fights and simply telling fun, pro-liberty, pro-free market, and pro-individual stories to young people? I'm going to object to the confines of that question. It's a great question, Chris. I'm going to object to the confines because I don't think it has to be either you give them stacks of facts, or you make it Captain Simple Science for them. There's only one way to convince these people that they're wrong, and they're terribly wrong. And the only way to do that is to get them to think about it. And you can't get them to think about it unless you do one thing, which is what I've realized over the last several years is the one thing needs to happen. I'm getting good at it. The only way that you can convince social justice warriors to take a look at their lives and begin to think about changing themselves is you have to show them that their own behavior is capitalist. You have to show them that every single day, faced with a socialist choice or a capitalist choice, they take the capitalist choice every single time. You have to confront them with this and see. If I say capitalism's swell, they say, "Well, what are you? You're some privileged white male. Of course, you think capitalism is good. It's designed for you. It's not designed for me. It's designed for people. It's designed for individuals. You can go as far or as close as you want to. You run as fast or as slow as you want to. That's the beauty of it. But put that aside for a second. Let me just pick this up where we're. So you have to put them in a box. Now, for those of you out there who are Star Trek fans, and I'm one of them, probably a big mystery to you now by now. I think it's 7,000 Star Trek things here in this studio. But for those of you who are Star Trek fans, I want to say it was Mudd's Women. I think it was Mudd's Women, or maybe not. I don't know. I don't remember the name of the episode. I could have told you everything about it 25, 30 years ago. I put more useful things in my head. But there's an episode where these androids are, there are hundreds of them. Star Trek hired a bunch of twins for this, which was really kind of cool. So they make the Betty model and the John model and all the rest. And they're manufactured. They're androids, and they're relatively simple androids, because they didn't want to put intelligence into all of them. So they can do just the basic things of walking around and serving, coffee, space coffee, Romulan coffee, and all the rest of it. But when they got into trouble, when they got into some kind of an intellectual trouble on the Star Trek show, they would just freeze up, and their little necklace, which had their number on them, so you could tell they were different. Here's number 63. Oh, look, here comes number 223. Can't be the same one because they're wearing a different necklace. These necklaces would start to flash. And there was one android who was the head android. He was also an artificial person, but he was given a lot more resources, and his name was Norman. And when these lower-level androids hit a logical problem that they could not... Mud. Thank you. I knew I was in the right place. Mud. When these simpler androids could not get out of a logical trap, they would just freeze up, and their lights would start to flash, and they would say, Norman, coordinate. Norman, coordinate. So they're basically bumping the question upstairs. I don't know how to answer this, so Norman, coordinate. And of course, you can set up a logical traps that presumably computers can't get out of. They couldn't get out of them in the 1960s anyway. So this is what you have to do, basically. Chris, you have to get them to the Norman coordinate point, and the way you get them into this, and at the end of that episode, actual genuine smoke comes out of their ears. It's absolutely awesome. You have to get them into a place where smoke is coming out of their ears, and the smoke is coming out of their ears because their gears are spinning so fast they cannot put these two things together. This cognitive dissonance is so strong that they simply shut down. They can't get out of it. They're trapped. And this is what you have to do. So I'm not going to belabor this because I've said this story 100,000 times, and I'll probably say another 100,000 times. But in a nutshell, if they tell you that they're all about social justice and socialism, and you ask them to take their cell phones down to a pawn shop, distribute the money to poor people, they won't do it. And the reason they won't do it is because it's their phone. And you've got them. You're all about taking other people's wealth distributed to you, but what about people who are not as well off as you are? Why don't you live up to your own morality, which is far superior to my capitalist morality? You're a socialist, for God's sakes. So why don't you do the socialist thing? Take all of these toys that you have, that capitalism made, that you got through a capitalist society, take these toys and sell them and hand the money to poor people so that they can eat. Let's go. They won't do it. But if you hit them with that, it will eat at their little minds late in the night. They'll stuff it, and they'll say, "Well, I'm doing social work, and I'm raising awareness and all the rest of this nonsense." Raising awareness is a kind of job I'd like to have, kind of job I do have actually. So they're stuck. Norm and coordinate. Yeah, you say you're a socialist, but you're not behaving like one. You're behaving like a capitalist. You're behaving like somebody who not only understands and likes private property, but is pretty protective of their private property. How do you explain this? And they're done. They're stuck. I told you about this other example too, which I thought was a very good one. People say, "Well, capitalism. How can you justify a man having 5 houses? It's disgusting." There are people who have no homes at all. How can you say somebody should be allowed to have 5 houses? How many phones? How many songs do you have on your iPhone, pal? Mr. Hipster, Mr. Social Justice Warrior. How many songs do you have on your personal device? 800, 1,000, maybe. Every one of them's $1, right? Round numbers. Some are a little less. $1.29. So let's just say it's $1. So you spend $1,000 on music. Can you listen to all 1,000 songs at the same time? No. Do you really need 1,000 songs? No. Could you get by on 10 songs and give $990 to poor people? Why not? What comes a point when you've had enough music, don't you think? Comes a point when you've taken more than your fair share of music, don't you think? I'm kind of disgusted by even looking at you. I don't want to be seen in the same room as you. Then they're done. They're done. They can't get out of it because they behave like capitalists. And that's because capitalism is the moral and ethical thing to do. And that's how you get them, Chris. You put them into the Norman coordinate modes, so the smoke comes out of their ears, and then they have to, some of them will be able to stuff it, but most of them will lie awake at night every now and then, and it will start to eat at them. And if you do it enough, you'll wake up those that can be woken up. Let's see, what time is it? I'll do another couple more, I think, maybe, and then I'll get back to doing the other work that I have to do here at BillWhittle.com, which is critically important at all times. That's 8 ups. I think number 7 is next. Hey, look at that. It's a name we don't see too often around here. Zechariah Tiemens. It says, how can we explain to our moderate left-wing friends that rather than being a rogue faction that has hijacked progressivism, social justice warriors are in fact the product of leftist philosophy? Well, I don't think they're going to take too much convincing, Zechariah, because the social justice warriors are the children of moderate leftists. And of all the things that are going on out there, the thing that I enjoy the most, because I think they're horrible people with a horrible philosophy, I really kind of enjoy watching them eat each other. That's the way communism always works and socialism always works, right? I mean, the first thing that you do when you have a revolution is to say, we're going to take power in the name of the people. And then everybody celebrates the power of the people. And then the other people who also helped you take power from the people are killed. Till finally it's just you. So it's fun to watch them eat themselves. And what I mean by that is you'll have a woman who's a 50-year feminist, let's say. She's been writing feminist screeds since Maud was on the air, doing it since 1971. And she's a known feminist author. And she'll get up and speak about feminism, in a radical feminism, to a group of young, liberal, progressive people. And she will stand there and expect to get the praise and the glory, and people will say Hosanna and wave palm fronds at her. But what, in fact, she gets is hatred and contempt. Because how can she possibly know about feminism if she's a white woman? What can she know about feminism? What is that? It's not transactional. Intersectional feminism? How can she possibly know about that? She not only does not get praise, she gets ridicule and scorn and hate. It's awesome. I love it. Because when your only philosophy in life is to find out who's the biggest victim, sooner it's like Highlander, right? There can be only one. There can only be one top victim. Ultimately, these gladiators and people are trying to place themselves higher and higher and higher on their own moral hierarchy of who's the most victimized. It's like pretty soon it's like Highlander. There's only one end immortal. There's only one, and they'll fight until there's only one left, and then finally there'll be one person left on the left, and that will be the single greatest victim in the country. And they have their own standards and they keep their own score and all the rest of it. Anybody who has less victimhood than that person loses. So the moderates are the people who sent their kids to be taught by radicals, thinking that, oh well, good, leftism, that's good. I'm a leftist. Let's give them nothing but leftism. Let's get religion and reason and all these other conservative things out of the picture, and then they'll be perfect little kids. If we can just get all these horrible conservative things out of the world, like playing with guns, let's say, or allowing girls to play with dolls when in point of fact they should be playing with slide rules because more women should be engineers and all the rest of this nonsense. So they decided, let's let's raise kids by liberals. We're liberals. Let's get other liberals to raise our liberal kids, and we'll make them more liberal than we are. And then once they have all the liberal values in them, we'll have a perfect society. And it ain't working out that way. As a matter of fact, these are the most violent, hate-filled, vicious swine that we've ever had in this country, these Antifa lunatics. We did a story on the NRA segment this morning about this guy. What was his name? It's on my Facebook page here. It's a professor who basically said, yeah, this is an interesting story. His name is Lars Meshack from Cal State, Imagine, California. I was shocked, so shocked. Fresno. He tweeted, "To save American democracy, Trump must hang. The sooner, the higher, the better." And his hashtags are the resistance and death of fascism. And he talks about how that they should shoot 2 Republicans in the back of the head for every immigrant that's forced to leave the country. And all of these other things. And he says, how can you have justice in a society like America when all there is racism and capitalism? Now, I'm looking at the picture here of Lars. And I have to drag this in. It's worth it. Let me just see if I will take whatever time it takes, because I just had an interesting thought about Lars, our friend Lars, because I think I got Lars figured out. Okay, I'm doing a screen grab, and now I have to find it, and then I will put it into, there he is, then I will put it into the incredibly forgiving Ustream software, and I'm going to hook up the mic because I want to talk about Lars, and I want to use his picture while I'm talking. Change audio, yeah. Okay, let's see if this works. Yeah, this is obviously a big blown up thing, but here's Lars. Here's the guy who says that Trump must hang. Here's the guy that says that Republicans must be killed. Here's the guy that says death to fascism, take all the fascists and kill them all. Here he is. Now, how much imagination do you think it takes to take this guy out of his 100% cotton shirt and put him into a black outfit with a black peak cap that has a chrome death's head on the front of it? If I have ever seen a human being in America in 2017 who looks more like an SS officer than Lars, I simply haven't met anybody who looks more like an SS officer. Look at the look in this guy's eyes. Look at the look in his eyes. It's not the look of intelligence. It's not the look of a freedom fighter. It's not the look of somebody who's passionate or compassionate for the poor. That is the look of a killer. That's a killer's look. And he's using killer language because he's a killer. That's what he is. He is a predator. He is a predator. Now, you might ask yourself, well, wait a minute, hold on. This doesn't make any sense. He's talking about how evil white people are, but he's white himself. Yes, that's right. He is being fascistic about the only thing that he's allowed to be a fascist about in America, and that's killing fascists. It's just so obvious to me. So I did a little looking on old Lars here, and I looked up his book, and I think he wrote a book and it was on German mercantile sea transport in the 18th century, talking about how a group of German merchants from what was it? Some German duchy, started a capitalist link with America. And I gave it 1 star, by the way, because I don't think that potential murderers should get money from Amazon. So what is it? What's going on here, Lars? Lars is using his inborn, natural, killer, fascist, murdering instincts, and he's channeling them in the only place that he can, which is towards conservatives. The only people, this is our white privilege, right? The only people that he's allowed to talk about openly killing, in his circle anyway, is white males, Republicans, conservatives. They're the only people that you can actually talk about killing. So he's a fascist because he's talking about murdering people who he disagrees with. He's talking about hanging and murdering people he disagrees with politically. He is the essence of the popular understanding of fascism. The technical definition is even a little more interesting, but he is, by every definition, a fascist. And he looks like a fascist. And if he'd been alive 50, 60, 70, 80 years ago, that face, let's bring it up again, why don't we? Because it's a very, very interesting face. If this face here had been born in Germany in the 1920s, this guy would be an SS officer. If he'd been born in Russia in the 1910s or 20s, he'd be a Chekist. He'd be a member of the MKGB, or he'd be a member of the OK. This is the guy who shows up at an apartment at 2 o'clock in the morning in a black car, takes a creaky elevator up to the 13th floor, bangs on the door, and takes an entire family out of there, puts them in the black car, takes them to the Lubyanka, and shoots them in the back of the head after they beat them to death, nearly to death. That's what this guy is. And he's always been that way. And he's wired that way. You just look at him. It's not hard to figure out. That look is a look. That's not the look of a peaceful person. That's the look of a fascist. And so he's got these fascistic tendencies. He wants to beat people up. He wants to shoot people. He wants to kill people. And where does he put that? He can't be a Nazi. He'd be a fine Nazi, but he can't be a Nazi in America today because he wouldn't get any traction. He'd be ostracized because this is, in fact, not a racist country. And it is, in fact, not a fascist country, because if this fascist had actually dressed up like a fascist and shown sympathy for fascism, like dressing like a Nazi, he would have not only not had any friends or a job, he'd be absolutely, absolutely ostracized, which is what happens in this decent country to actual fascists, you see? So there is one group of people he is allowed to talk about killing, and that's us. And so that's what he does. And I'm not worried about this guy, because unlike his, I'm not going to say his grandfather, it's not fair to slander grandchildren of people that do evil things, and perhaps his grandfather, in fact, likely his grandfather didn't do anything particularly evil or bad, but he is a living contradiction, and he is trying, among many other things that he's trying to do. In fact, this is a big motivator, so I'm 100% convinced of this, folks. Why does this white German guy named Lars talk so much about fighting racism and fascism? Why? Because he knows that he is in the group of people that are fascists and racists, according to him. So he has to be extra special, double anti-fascist, because his name is Lars and he's a white male. He doesn't want to be a white male. What he wants to be is a black female. He wants to be a black female lesbian, because then, if he was, then he'd have the moral authority to do the murdering that he wants to, and he'd have the moral authority to attack the people that he sees in the mirror, and he'd be able to do it without contradiction, without driving himself batty. He doesn't want to be a white male. It's kind of fun. Maybe we should end here because we started on white privilege. Let's go to him one more time. Lars, who talks about the evils of capitalism, is a professor at a university. You can only imagine my surprise that that's a professor at a university. His book is about 18th century German merchant sailors and their connection between Germany and America. Now, that might be a perfectly interesting field, but I suspect that if it was, I would have heard of it already. So you've got this guy who is good at one thing. He knows a great deal about 18th century German ocean-borne trade. But unfortunately, that's not a well-paying job, and I think probably much more likely it doesn't get the girls in the sack, or the boys, whatever the case may be. And so he's quite angry about all this. And he's quite angry that a person who knows so much about 18th century German mercantile relationships across the Atlantic Ocean through sea trade, he's quite upset that somebody with that degree of knowledge is not more successful than he is. He's a professor at Fresno, at Cal State Fresno. He's a professor at a state school in Fresno. I don't know if you've ever been to Fresno. There's some lovely people in Fresno, but Fresno is not the Riviera, and Fresno is not Harvard. So here's this angry guy who knows a little bit about something, who has a book out there, which I'll bet he sold 6 copies of, to other people like him. And he's wondering why he's not popular. No, it's not popular because he's an angry, violent loser. That's why he's angry. And he's wondering why people like Donald Trump get elected president of the United States, and he's a professor at Cal State Fresno. Yeah, T-Dog Lies brings it up. I was going to mention it. Churchill said that the fascists of the future will call themselves anti-fascists. Because you have to understand something. Fascism exists only when you have an enemy. You cannot have fascism without an enemy. For the Nazis, the enemies were the Jews. The Soviets said we are fighting fascism, but this definition of fascism, controlling people's thoughts and killing people who disagree with you, they were better at it. They were better fascists than the fascists were. The Soviets felt the same thing. The enemy is the class. It doesn't matter whether he's a good person. If he's from the bourgeoisie, he needs to be killed. And if this person's a mass murderer, but he's a proletarian, fine. Put him to work in the gulag, intimidating the musicians and the scientists that they have there, working in coal mines. So, in Germany, if you wanted to beat people up, what did you do? Well, if you wanted to beat people up in Germany, a certain time in Germany, you figured, well, who can I beat up and get away with it? The Jews. Let's beat up the Jews. Yeah, nobody likes the Jews. I know. I'll hang out with the Nazis, and I'll get to beat up people, which gets that out of my system, and I get to take their stuff too, by the way. You know, the complicity is something, I forget what the number is, 7% maybe of the German population were members of the Nazi Party, which means that most of them weren't ideological, fellow travelers. But one of the things that happened with the Nazis, and the exact same thing happened with the communists as well, and this is where the regular common people become complicit in the crime. Regular Russian people and regular German people were not members of the SS. They were not Nazis. They were not any of those things. And they told themselves that they don't know what's going on, and they told themselves that that family's being evicted, but they're probably just being put on a train someplace and being sent to someplace like maybe Madagascar, as if that was okay, you know. Well, it's not like they're going to kill them or anything. They're just taking the Jews out and they're just moving them someplace else, as if that's okay. But where they become complicit in the crime is when a Jewish family is evacuated from Munich, and they've worked very hard, and now they've got a nice apartment. Well, once those people are picked up and shipped out, guess what happens to that apartment? It's available. And guess what happens to all the furniture in that apartment? Because these people can only take a small bundle of things, which is going to be stolen from them again anyway, along with their teeth and their hair. So what happens to that stuff? Well, it goes to somebody, right? How many German families moved into Jewish apartments and knew that at the very least, the people that used to live in this place were taken away for no reason other than they had a different religion? How many of the people in the house on the embankment, which is one of the Seven Sisters of Stalin's big buildings, it's a giant apartment complex on the bank of the river in Moscow. And this is where most of the Communist Party nomenclatura lived. How many of those people lived in fear every single night and waited for the Black Maria, the black limousine, for the checkup, under whatever particular name they were going with at that particular time? And how many of them sat there in their beds terrified and listened to that elevator and prayed and prayed and prayed and finally were only able to breathe when that elevator had passed their floor and kept going, which meant that they were safe for tonight. Somebody else is going to be murdered, but not them, not tonight. And then when those families been evicted and that person's been taken out and shot, that apartment is open and they move into it. And that's where the complicity is, in my opinion. You know, that's where it is. They didn't ask any questions about where the original owners of that apartment went. Part of that was because they were terrified, and that's certainly true. And part of it is because they wanted the nicer apartment. The entire Soviet system, secret police system, the Great Terror especially, it worked on denouncements. That's all it did. If you were suspected, you didn't have to do anything, by the way. This is the most important thing to understand about how the Soviets worked. You didn't have to be guilty of crimes against Soviet power. You only had to be a little bit more likely to commit a crime in the future than somebody else. And what I mean by a little more likely, if you had an aunt living in Belgium, let's say, that'd probably be enough to get you shot, because she's a relative and she's lived in the West, and it's possible that you might communicate, and some of these Western ideas about freedom and so on might be transmitted to you. And you might transmit it to somebody else, and then we'd all be in a heck of a lot of trouble, wouldn't we, here in the Kremlin? So off you go. And so it's all based on denouncements. And so when they would take somebody to the Lubyanka, the first thing they do is torture them. And there were millions of people with integrity millions and millions of Russians with actual genuine integrity who were taken away and told to denounce people, and they wouldn't do it. They ended up doing it, but they ended up doing it because they'd been tortured, beaten to death in many cases. People had their eyeballs knocked out of their heads, that kind of thing. So very few people went in there and just started denouncing people. Most of them fought. Most of them decided, no, I'm not going to turn in my friends. My friends didn't do anything. I didn't do anything. But once you're beaten regularly, long enough, you'll sign anything. Is it Tukhachevsky? That sounds right. I always like to know these things when I'm going to go out. Hang on a second. Let's have a look and see if this is who I think it is. Yes, perfect. Got it right on the first pass. The Russian people, prior to World War II, had one actual genuine military genius, and his name was Mikhail Tukhachevsky, or Tukhachevsky. She knows how to pronounce it. I was going to struggle through. He was the only person in the entire Red Army who understood that war had changed to the degree that Germans like Guderian and all the rest of them knew it. And he was a former Tsarist officer, I believe. And so, needless to say, by the way, the real reason he was killed, and a lot of reasons he was killed, but he was fighting against the Poles in the Civil War. And he was very successful, and Stalin was fighting against them as well, and Stalin was a catastrophe. So even in the 20s, he was somebody who did well while you did badly, so that means you're going to have to be killed someday. So anyway, here's Tukhachevsky. So he's an actual military genius, and he's taken out and he's shot in 1937. And the reason I bring his name up is because in order to justify this, every single person who was shot had to have signed a confession. And if there was any doubt about whether or not they were guilty, they would simply show each other the confession. And one person said, well, he was tortured. And then the guy would say, well, he signed every page. Of course he's guilty. He wouldn't have signed if he wasn't guilty. It's the little things in history, It's the little tiny details that really just get you to the heart of the matter. So every single person who was shot in the Lubyanka had signed a confession of one kind or another. And Tukhachevsky's confession was covered with small little brown dots, which we later figured out was the spray of his own blood. So he's being beaten so badly in the Lubyanka. He's being beaten so badly that the blood is spraying across the room and landing on the document. Yeah, blood splatter. David Wellman is a blood splatter analysis is a science all to itself. But Tukhachevsky's confession, for which he was later shot, is covered in his own blood because of the torturing that was done in order to get him to confess. So, I just don't know. Having looked at it quite a bit, I just don't think it's a very good system. And I think we'd be better off if we left it alone. And I'm looking at a picture of this guy. A guy like Tukhachevsky, I don't want to say he's one of the greatest geniuses of all time. Although I have to say that the Tsarist General Suvorov, Russian General Suvorov, apparently is the only general in history who never lost a battle. He fought 20 battles and he won all of them. Which, by the way, Carl Sagan used this because Carl Sagan's always down on the military or something. But Sagan also liked good arguments. It's apparently a true story. There was some scientist or something, I think he might have been working on the atomic bomb project, or it was afterwards. In any event, it was a scientist, and it was in America. And somebody said, we're going to introduce you to this general and treat him with respect because he's a great general. And the scientist said, well, how do you know he's a great general? And the aide said, well, because he's won 5 battles. And then the guy in his head did the math, and he said, well, let's see, if you win half your battles, 50%, and 25%, 12.5%, basically said, so this guy's got a 6% chance, or 12%, something like that, right? Just randomly of winning 6 battles. He said, show me a general who won 10 battles, and that's just kind of a little interesting thing as far as statistics goes. But 20 battles, Suvorov won them all, and that's pretty remarkable. In any event, the Russians are invaded by the Germans. And one of the reasons that it was such a catastrophe for the Russians was because every single officer that they had that had any kind of sense had been taken out and shot in the purge of the Red Army in the late 30s. and I mean the numbers are something like 22 out of 23 marshals, or 19 out of 23 marshals. 370 out of 408 generals. I mean, just massacred them all, and because they were a threat to Stalin. And then when the Germans came, there wasn't anybody who knew what they were doing, and they had to learn on the job, which cost them 20 million people, and probably another 20 million civilians. If Tukhachevsky had been, I always wonder what would happen sometimes in history. If Tukhachevsky had just been alive, because when the Germans invaded, by the way, in 1941, when the Germans invaded Russia, all of these officers like Tukhachevsky, who happened to still be alive, that wasn't many of them, were immediately brought out of either the Lubyanka or the gulags and given a brand new uniform, a shave, and a haircut, and sent out to fight the Germans. And it makes me wonder how the Russians would have done if they'd had professional soldiers on June 22nd, 1941. It makes me wonder. Of course, if you've got a dictator, it doesn't matter if they're professional soldiers or not. They're not going to get their way. But you get the idea, right? I mean, if that had been, if the Kerensky government had survived, and you had kind of like a Weimar kind of even if it was an unstable republic, but a republic, and you hadn't killed all of your officers, I wonder how the Russians would have done against the Germans in 1941. And I don't think they would have had to pay the price that they ended up paying for this. They didn't know. By the way, Victor Davis Hanson, the more I read of him, the better, the more amazed I am. He was talking about criticism of Iraq and, the revolt of the generals, and he just went through history, all the different cases where officers had been cashiered or changed or so on. And he made a point that's not so hard to figure out. It's pretty obvious, really. But basically what happens is the people who are good peacetime generals, generally speaking, are bad wartime generals, and vice versa. And that's not so hard to figure out. A wartime general is somebody who cuts to the chase, is somebody who does not get bogged down with niceties about language or discussion, is a natural predators. They're and in a good way. They are good at fighting and killing people. And those people don't get promoted in peacetime. The people who get promoted in peacetime are the people who've got very smooth language, and they're constantly kissing butt, and they're calling to congratulate the wife of the senator on her birthday and asking how the kids are doing. Those are the guys who get promoted to general in peacetime. But when those guys have to start commanding armies during wartime, they're not very good at it. And likewise, the brutes, the uncouth, shabby men like U.S. Grant and Sherman and loudmouth, arrogant bastards like Patton and MacArthur, these guys, they have to emerge from war. It takes years of mistakes and errors and people dying, your own soldiers dying because of the terrible, terrible decisions made by bad peacetime generals, until finally the wartime generals make themselves known because they're competent at a lower level. They're just doing a good job. And then finally, after 3 years or whatever of these millions of people killed because you're incompetent peacetime generals, then you realize this guy's a fighting general, and next thing you know, U.S. Grant has command of the Army of the Potomac, and in fact of the entire Union. William Tecumseh Sherman, the first modern general, an actual genuine genius who figured out, unlike Grant, we don't have to assault Cold Harbor trenches and lose 7,000 men in a morning, in a couple of hours. We're just going to keep moving around them. They can't stop us, so they're going to constantly set up trying to fight us. We're not going to fight them. We're just going to walk around them. And Sherman did the Western campaign of the 10th of the casualties or something like that Grant had back in the East. And Patton, who's a loudmouth, who designed his own uniforms, who basically sat down and sketched on a piece of paper his uniform, which included, the jodhpurs and the riding crop and a chrome helmet. He designs that uniform and he makes it on his own, and he's a kind of arrogant, nasty, mean-spirited, rotten bastard who's just exactly the guy you want to take an entire army through Germany in 2-3 weeks. Patton would have had Berlin 5 months before the Soviets got there if he hadn't run out of gasoline. He just moved too fast. He was too successful. My favorite story about Patton, I mentioned it a few times on the show. I don't remember the exact numbers. I need to look it up because I tell this story every now and then. But Patton is racing Third Army through the bottom of Germany. He's just moving fast. They don't know where he is. He's moving so fast. And so Eisenhower in chief in Supreme Headquarters, Allied Expeditionary Force headquarters, Allied headquarters. Eisenhower says, "George, I want updates from you. I need to know where you are at any given time." Patton says, "Okay." So Patton sends a radio message to Eisenhower's headquarters and says, "I need to take the town of," and I don't remember the name of the town, so please forgive me because some of you do, but let's just say for the sake of the argument, it was Bremen, just because it's a German name that I know. It wasn't Bremen, but let's say it was. And I don't remember the numbers either, but you get the idea. So Patton sends a radio message to Ike saying, "Hey, I'm at Bremen. I can take Bremen. I'm going to take Bremen, and then I'm going to move on." And Ike wires him back and says, "George, you can't take Bremen. It's going to take 5 divisions to take Bremen, and you can't do it. So stop." And then a couple hours later, Patton wires him back and says, "Well, I took Bremen with 1 division. Do you want me to give it back to him?" That's the kind of guy that wins wars out there. And LeMay and all the rest of these guys who, unpleasant people. Anyway, that's that. I think that'll probably do it. Yeah, definitely do it. Okay, well, we're off again to another frustrating start because equipment doesn't work. It just doesn't work. I don't know what to say. Working all day, working last week. Just, nope, didn't work. In any event, I think that'll do it. What's this, 152, 153? Somebody will tell me. I think it's 152. I'll figure it out. So time for me to go. Now it's time to say goodbye to all our company. MIC. See you real soon. KEY. Why? Because we like you. MOUSE. You guys be careful out there now. And thanks for joining us, and especially to our Strata Loungers, our little family of awesome friends. Thanks again for all the support. Thanks again for the support of the members. Hope you guys like the new interview show. And unless something is going on that I don't know of, we will be 152. Thank you very much, Aesop's Retreat. We'll be back with 153 next Wednesday. All right. Everybody take care now. We'll see you. Bye-bye.